As a centrist, I have to entertain certain ideas I don't usually agree with in order to neutralize the extreme or erratic elements within either political leaning. As a centrist, I'm just entertaining how to look at immigration and look at what we need to do in ideal situations to get to the truth on how to solve immigration in a productive and realistic way. Originally, I didn't think about immigration that much because originally I thought other problems are more relevant and problematic. But because of how often the immigration topic was coming up in politics, and how sometimes the stories around immigration were being weaponized in order to control people for their political votes, it forced me to really think about immigration and really think about it as a real problem and what is the real truth behind immigration. This whole thing that you might hear online about how the left wants completely open borders is not true. Not many people on the left actually want complete open borders. Like with every political problem, you don't just want to purely pay attention to the problem, but always end up concentrating on actual solutions. So I began to think about immigration to see if I can figure out what the real problem behind immigration truly is. The thing that I utilize to figure out the truth behind the problem of immigration is one of my universal problem solutions. I used my origin problem solution. What is the origin problem solution? It goes like this. In order to figure out how to solve a problem, you at first need to figure out how the problem was first caused and created. And then it's a matter of undoing the things that you did wrong in order to solve the problem. The true problem behind immigration is corruption. Corruption in the countries that immigrants are immigrating from. So in order to solve the problem of mass immigration worldwide, you would have to solve the problem in those countries the immigrants are coming from. Why people are fleeing their country? People are fleeing other countries because of multiple different reasons. Here are various problems that cause people to flee their country. And this is just a few, there's probably way more than just this. Corruption, strife, poverty, corporate corrupt politicians, feckless liberal politicians, theocracies having overbearing control of its citizens, religious extremism, oppressive governments, countries with too much authoritarian control, countries that don't provide for its citizens, or countries with a lack of equal rights. In order to prevent people from fleeing from other countries, you would have to get countries to prevent corruption and to start providing for its citizens. Until you do, people will continue to flee their neglectful or oppressive country, seeking a better life in countries that are more liberal, more developed, and have developed more socially. The reason why there's an influx of immigrants coming into other countries is because there keeps on being one immigrant crisis after another. I first became aware of an immigrant crisis after the Syrian refugee crisis, and that's when I first learned that immigrant crises were a thing. A global problem requires a global solution. So now it's time for me to entertain political ideas that I don't usually agree with in order to neutralize the bad faith and bring the right-wing parties back to the centre-right. In order to solve a global problem, it requires a global plan. A part of a global plan to stop or solve to solve the problem of relaxed borders and to stop people in some countries from getting frustrated down to their country taking in the majority of immigrants. In order to solve this problem, theoretically, you would need all countries to equally take in their fair share of immigrants, making the adoption of immigrants fairer across the board, erasing tensions by getting rid of unfairness. So the first thing we should be doing as a country is to compile data on how many immigrants can the UK, for example, afford to take in. we would need to compile data on how much land mass does Britain have, how much infrastructure, buildings do we have, how much of that infrastructure can realistically house immigrants. We need to figure out what's the limit of immigrations we can take in before it becomes a burden on resources, infrastructure and space. We have the data to figure this out, and once a country like my country of Britain figure this out, all other countries could do the same. We would need to figure this out as a planet, so all countries can realistically cope with the global immigrant crises. There will be barriers in a global plan. There are barriers when it comes to a global plan, when it comes to every country taking in immigrants equally across the board. Some countries might not be willing to take in immigrants. There might be language barriers. Immigrants might only want to go to countries or go to a country where their family already lives. There could be human rights violations in the receiving countries. Some countries might be too small or not have enough resources to house the immigrants. But in an ideal situation where every country would be taking in their fair share of immigrants, it would put tensions at ease around the world if you were to make it work. Theoretically, if one country was taking in all the immigrants and none of the other countries were taking in any immigrants, the people in that country taking in all the immigrants would get frustrated because they would look at other countries not taking in any immigrants, and of course the people of that country would perceive that to be unfair, resulting in the frustration of its citizens. In order to get to a major truth behind society or nation building, I have to mention something at first might seem kind of odd, but it eventually makes sense on how it's connected to the current immigration crises, or the immigration problem. So, in Star Trek, the TV show, it is setting in a hypothetical future where humanity has achieved space travel, and humankind in that universe has started exploring the universe to a much fuller extent. But in Starfleet, the Academy people join in order to explore space. In Starfleet, they have a protocol for when they discover new intelligent species on distant planets that they discover. The protocol dictates that they cannot introduce themselves to that species or intervene with that species' development until the species discovers true space travel, the ability to fully explore space, and the launching of their first spaceship. The reason why they don't want to interfere is because civilizations need to develop at their own pace, and interfering could lead to authoritarian control of foreign planets, or in the immigration case, foreign countries. Because Starfleet and humanity in the future looked at history and they had seen evidence that authoritarian control tended to happen when there was an invasion or interference. So when it comes to solving problems in a country that aren't yours, you can't just go into their country and dictate how other governments run their country or government. So potentially there's little you can do to make those countries develop at a faster pace. So while these lesser developed countries are still developing culturally, socially and politically, the countries that have developed to a greater degree of quality of life have to take in some immigrants until these other countries solve their problems and catch up with the other more developed and more modernized countries. Immigration is a necessity. While you're waiting for those countries to get their act together, I think allowing some immigrants into your country is going to be a necessity because of a moral and ethical duty. But taking in most of the immigrants is not the way. Entertaining potential solutions. Example of solutions. Communication. The more we communicate with other countries and the more we work together and cooperate, the quicker we can solve all of humanity's problems. Countries need to get together and work together in order to figure out how to help each other think on how to solve our collective problems. Setting an example. If we can drastically lower corruption in our country, then maybe we can set an example for other countries to do the same. The age of cooperation. We are currently not ready to cooperatively work with all other countries to cooperate and work together to solve global problems. I foresee sometime in the future where we will see the age of global cooperation, where all countries around the world will be able to work together after working out our differences. When this happens, we could look to actually solving global corruption and poverty. The sooner we reach this age of global cooperation, the better. People want to leave corrupt countries. If Britain, for example, was to turn into a theocratic, authoritarian country that loses its equal rights, then people would want to leave here too. No one wants to be led by austerity-loving politicians. But being an isolationist and completely closing your borders isn't going to solve the problem, because there will still be immigrant crises popping up. So until you solve the problem at the source, then immigration is always going to be a problem until we do. If isolationism was going to work, it would only work in the short term, because the problem of corruption creating immigrant crises around the world will still persist until you solve the problem at its source. Right-wing or conservative politicians be warned. If you don't solve the problems of austerity in your country, the strategy of isolationism will fail, and the people could turn against them. If reform did solve the immigration problem, and they don't do enough, but then they don't do enough to improve people's lives, people could also turn against reform. If reform fails to provide for its citizens, and it turns out immigration was just a deception to manipulate people for votes, their voters could turn against them. Never fail to provide for the citizens, or the frustration bar in society will also work against them. I was watching a video, and someone made the point in the video that liberal politicians in countries around the world are failing to find successful messaging on immigration, which is working against liberal politicians, preventing their success in elections. So maybe the way in which I'm talking about immigration could be the way to help liberal politicians when it comes to talking about immigration. And what they need to do is they need to give the full picture of immigration like I did in this video. One of the things that we should be doing, for example, in Britain, is we should be getting parties all over the country to create think tanks on how to solve immigration and how to potentially work with other countries, share our intelligences in order to figure out this global immigration problem.